Hello, everyone. Welcome. I really wish we could all be together. Well, although I guess if we were all together, we'd be having a different sort of conversation. I'm Rabbi Shira Stutman, and on behalf of Sixth&I and The Atlantic, I just want to begin by thanking all of you for joining us for tonight's conversation about journalism in the time of COVID-19. I am very happy to be here with Editor-in-Chief of The Atlantic, Jeff Goldberg.
Thank you, Shira.
Yeah,
the part where
I have a little bit more to say before we, just a little bit more. Since the early days of the pandemic, The Atlantic has been an essential resource for reliable information about COVID-19, the scale of the pandemic, the amount of uncertainty around it, and the impact it's having on every facet of our lives is really unprecedented in our lifetimes. And that cannot make for easy reporting. So tonight we're going to try to pull back the curtain a little bit on what it takes to cover this pandemic and to run a media company under such challenging circumstances. What you all need to know if you're watching is that later in the program, we're going to be able to take some of your questions. So throughout the program, just chat your questions at any point that you have them, and we will collect them, and we will answer as many as we can before we end this evening. One final note, and then we really will dive in, which is this: as you all know, tonight's program is free, but if you're in a position where you're able, we would ask that you support The Atlantic by becoming a subscriber for yourself, for your family, for everyone you know. And of course, please support Sixth&I as well. We are a nonprofit institution trying to figure out how to be in this new world. So there are links in a comment that's pinned to the top of the comments section. Again, we thank you for your support and your questions. But tonight, Jeff Goldberg, who is one of the most well-known interviewers, I think, in America today, gets to be on the hot seat. So I get to ask you questions, which I'm very excited about. I want to begin. There was a piece in The Atlantic by Ashley Fetters. She says, what to ask instead of how are you during a pandemic? So I want to ask you different questions than how are you as we begin. I'll begin with, how are you coping? How are you doing? How's your family doing? How are people holding up?
I'm fine. Thanks for asking.
No, come on. Okay, how about this one?
You know me a little bit, so you know that I'm a catastrophist anyway. So I just assume the worst thing is going to happen. So I think I'm fairly resilient in all of this. I'm a little bit, it's weird to work, 12, 14 hours a day, which is what we're doing, and also simultaneously be bored. But the flatness of the days, we had a piece about this, in fact, that, it's a little bit Groundhog Day quality. But if we're going to, I don't want to usurp your role here as spiritual leader, but if you're going to practice gratitude, now's a good time. So if you're not sick, and if you don't have relatives who are sick, and if you have a job, and if you have food in the refrigerator and electricity, what do you got to count your blessings.
Okay, fine. So then
gratitude makes it easier to manage all of this.
So then let's open with a spiritual question then, right? Okay. Like how does one practice gratitude? How does one actually practice it as opposed to just thinking it in their brain?
If I say mindfulness, will you fall out of your chair because I'm so sensitive?
What does mindfulness mean? It means
I don't even know. It's
in the Goldbergian context.
I've heard you say it. I don't know what it means. It means reminding yourself all the time that don't take anything for granted. I mean, this is a good opportunity to remember that we shouldn't take things for granted. I think, and we've gradually, one of the interesting things from a journalistic perspective is, how to write about the people who can't afford, literally, figuratively, to stay at home or don't have homes, and I'm not into the, we've run some pieces by people who are workers, delivery people, work in stores, who say, please don't call us a hero. It makes you feel better. It doesn't make me feel better. But on the other hand, gratitude is saying, I don't have to do certain things. I wish the people who have to do these things well. Gratitude is it's like just being conscious of what you have rather than constantly complaining about what you don't have. I don't know.
You just said about 100 interesting things. I don't know which one I want to pick up on. I do think that's true. I mean, I think it's also it's also speaking it outwards as well and sort of practicing it outwards as well. I wonder, is there a distinction between those people who really have no choice but to go out and work and those people who are choosing to go out and work? I don't know if that's a distinction without a difference there, but it does strike me that they're the people who are
who is choosing to go? Who do you mean is choosing to go out? And by
People
go
who
out,
are-
specific thing, I don't mean going jogging around the mall or something, the National Mall. I mean going out and delivering packages, or being a cop or a sanitation worker, or whatever, working in a restaurant, making home delivered food or something. That's what I mean.
Right. Versus like volunteering and sort of to serve meals in a certain sort of place.
Well, that's also great, and we should we have gratitude toward them. But I'm talking about. I mean, I think one of the things we're finding in this country right now is that we are bifurcated. There are the people who have jobs that allow them to stay inside, and then there are people who have to go to their jobs. And what we're finding out also, when you look at that group, what you're finding is that many of them really have most of them have no functional choice in the matter. You want a paycheck, you go do your dangerous job. You drive you work in the metro system in Washington, or the subway in New York, and there you are. You're exposed every day. Obviously, hospital workers, doctors, nurses, and so on are a different category completely. But
I mean, it's funny because, there is this way that we are realizing what many of us have known for quite a long time, but, it's even more stark how bifurcated we are, right? Like how much there are those who really are safe enough to, who have the ability to stay in their house and get all their food delivered and stockpile food, right? Like on toilet paper, whatever it is. And then there are those who don't. And at the same time, we're also seeing how interconnected we are, right? Like me leaving my house isn't only about me and my health, it's about the person down the street and even the person around the world. And so it's this weird juxtaposition that these two very different ideas that are both feel so true in this moment.
that was very profound.
Thank you. Thank you. Sermonetic even.
Yeah.
No, you can't make fun of me during this. I have a lot of questions to ask.
Not making. I'm saying that was profound. Can you take a compliment?
I don't know from you, I don't know how it's going. All right, you know what? Enough about me. Let's talk about you. I want to talk about, was there a moment for you where like it really clicked that COVID was really that COVID was going to be a game changer, for the world? Or was it something that you sort of like eased into, like the frog in the water getting hotter and hotter?
No, by the way, it's not true. My colleague Jim Fallows has done the definitive work on that. Frogs actually try to jump out of slowly boiled water. He didn't find this out from experimenting. Don't get me wrong, but that is a cliche. That's not correct. Frogs actually.
Oh, that's very disappointing.
To try to jump out. Yeah, I know. You got to find another analogy. There were a couple of, just in my own life, I guess
also as a journalist, I don't know, is there?
Yeah, well, no, for me, it really was. I was in London in the beginning of March. We had an event. I wanted to see our people in London, and we had a big event there. And yeah, we knew enough. There was a foreboding. London was about a week behind the East Coast in terms of consciousness of what was going on. This is before it's before a lot of things, before Boris Johnson and everything else. And I got to Heathrow in the early afternoon to go home, and it was completely empty. And I've never seen it that way before. And I actually tweeted a photo of the main entrance of Terminal 4 at 2 p.m. And it was a little bit of a kind of a holy cow moment, like something is shifting. And then, by the way, something even smaller, but also a little bit close to home and more profound. We had already started working from home as opposed to our offices in DC and New York. There's a restaurant on the first floor of our office at the Watergate, and we got a notice very early on in this, notice that they had just closed, period, end of story. Like they were just gone, like a week and a half had just wiped them out. It was a big deal because we know all the people who work there. I mean, it's a place you go every day because, it's right there. And probably 12, 13 employees. And, you suddenly struck by the fact that, these are people who work in restaurants. That's their skill set. So it wasn't like they were going to go find another job. And that was sort of a moment when you think, oh my God, like they just the underpinnings just came out from under them. So those are the personal things. On the story front, Jim Hamblin, one of our science writers, who is an MD also, wrote a story that argued that you're likely to get coronavirus. It kind of talked about the spread, and it brought home it was a very, very popular story, very well done. It brought home for a lot of people, including me, that we're in a real thing. That came in the moment when a lot of politicians, it wasn't just Trump, a lot of politicians were still doing the, it's flu, it's like the flu, we get, we'll get through it, whatever. And you read this, again, he's a physician, he knows what he's talking about. And you go, oh, I see, this is actually fundamentally different. And so those are moments for me, I guess.
Yeah, I think actually that moment where the article, "You're likely to get coronavirus," started to be posted and reposted and reposted and retweeted everywhere was, for me, one of the, will always be in my mind, this moment. And it did feel like it wasn't, I don't know if it's sort of like, in the bubble of DC, or that things really started to shift and you realize that something very different was happening.
And for me, I mean, this is the line that you have to walk as an editor today. We have access to an enormous amount of data about the number of people reading a story, how long they're reading a story, when they're reading a story, and so on. We don't make our decisions, of course, around that data. We do stories because we think they're important to do, but we are taught by this data. And what happened with that story is, we have this app, or this program called Chartbeat that a lot of media companies use. And so you could watch what stories are popular and what's kind of cruising along. And Hamblin's story just went through the roof in a way that you don't often see. And that is that spike was a way of understanding what the broad, because he's talking about millions and millions of people, like the broad public grabbed onto that story. And what that said to me was that the anxiety level was much higher than I thought. And that's when we sort of, I guess, pivoted fully in a kind of way to what we're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the many reasons that anxiety was so high is because of what felt like, certainly by many people I know, is like a total lack of leadership. Like we just didn't know where to turn.
What you're referring to? I have no idea.
I'm just a rabbi. I'm not political, but it just felt like there was really.
You're a simple village rabbi, and your village is Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. Got it.
10 blocks from the White House, but whatever.
Got it. I got it.
I guess, and so that I noticed like increased my anxiety, and I'm wondering if you were sort of. I have two questions. First, I want to ask who you think who are the leaders that you've turned to in this moment? Like who are the people personally, but also professionally? And then I also want to ask you about how your leadership has changed in this moment. But let's begin with like the others. Are there people who you are turning to, as there has been such a vacuum of leaderships in certain arenas?
What do you mean, as a citizen, as a person?
Yeah, as a citizen. Like, for instance, everywhere I go, I hear people talking about Cuomo, right? Like the people are talking about Cuomo as like a real leader in this moment in a way that has been unexpected for many people.
What's interesting about Cuomo is that in an ordinary time, New York State and New York City were both caught a little bit flat-footed by this. There are real criticisms of that, of particularly de Blasio, but also Cuomo. But what's so interesting is that national leadership has been so incoherent and absurd in 10 different ways that Cuomo's press conferences in particular made people feel like, oh, here's a guy who can make a sentence, here's a guy who can carry through a thought, here's a guy who can initiate programs, so it is interesting. It is interesting to think about that in the context of we're almost in a process of defining deviancy down, to borrow from Moynihan, where it's like any governor who stands in front of people and doesn't insult them for 10, 15 minutes is like, oh, that guy's like Nelson Mandela, as a leader. It's interesting also, we've done stories about the Prime Minister of New Zealand and about the Chancellor of Germany. And we have a piece up today that many people are reading, very good piece by Derek Thompson on South Korea, why the South Korea model worked. And people run to those pieces because I think at a certain point, you begin to doubt whether human beings and their elected leadership or the people who happen to be leading their countries are capable of this. And so the New Zealand piece is a fascinating example. I think people are just, wait, there is a country where they've got this down. That's very, very encouraging to people, but also depressing to people considering the hole we're in at the moment. Does that make sense? I mean, broadly,
it makes sense.
Broadly, by the way, if you're looking for a leadership or a guide, The Atlantic is meant to be an enlightened magazine. I mean that in the, we're a magazine of the Enlightenment, believe in empirical truth and data and science, and and so we try to feature the work of scientists and try to, obviously there's going to be interrogation of the science too, but we try to lean into that kind of
and I think that is, I think there are a lot of Americans who are turning toward their news media of choice to get their information. And I think there are ways that is, I know that is true. That is true for me, right? Like other Americans. And I think that works when the media source that you turn to sort of works with facts and science. And it's more problematic when it doesn't. And I think we're seeing.
No, sorry, go ahead.
No. I just think we're seeing some of that now. And I have it. Go. You talk first. And
No. All I was going to say was that there's two different lanes here. I think. One is the Fox lane, and some of the crap that happens on the internet. And when we write the history of this, we'll look at the way certain anchors and certain people on Fox lulled their viewers into a false sense of security, right? And it's a popular network and it continues to be popular. But I also think this is a golden age for the quote unquote mainstream media. I mean, the quality. This was a kind of somebody said this to me, I forgot who, but it was smart. It was a kind of emperor has no clothes moment. There are certain media companies that were ready for this, certain newsrooms that were ready for this and had the lift and the capability and the people and the expertise to do it. And millions and millions and millions of people came to them because actually, apart from all the noise and the Twitter nonsense and the enemy of the state crap, enemy of the people crap that the president dispenses, actually, the majority of Americans and majority of people around the world are looking for quality sources of verified information. The double irony, if you want to get into this, is that we're in a business that has never been healthier or more urgent or more important in one sense, and people are using it. On the other hand, it's a terrible business climate for media organizations because of the partial collapse of the advertising market and all the rest. So it's never been bigger, never been more vital, never been doing more important work, and also very seldom in our histories have we been suffering from a business standpoint the way these companies are suffering now.
Why do you think that, for instance, Fox News, I mean, maybe this is a dumb question given where we are in America right now, but aside from the fact that like Fox News sort of, always takes knee-jerk, sort of tries to support the president more or less, and sort of like, why do you think it was so important to Fox News to downplay the virus for so long?
It wasn't about, I think there are two streams of thought there. The first is a misunderstanding of the enemy in a kind of way. Unlike Al-Qaeda, which was trying to shape American foreign policy and make us scared, and had terrorist groups have a political agenda. They want you to change, right? They want the fear that they induce to cause you to change. Virus doesn't give a shit. Virus just wants to replicate. Like it doesn't. And so there became this kind of like, we're going to stand up to this enemy and we're not going to let the virus win. The virus doesn't care if you want it to win or not. It's just a virus, right? And so sometimes these things get slotted into these narratives about independence and individualism. The president just talked about the American people are warriors, and you could be a warrior or you could be a 90-year-old in a wheelchair. It doesn't matter. Like, what does that have to do with anything? It's just a virus. So there's that. There's a kind of a misunderstanding of what we're up against. The second part is just purely oppositional behavior. And the way to understand this in my mind is if this were happening when President Obama were still president, this exact pandemic, and if there were any inkling, I don't think this is plausible given the way he handled Ebola, but let's say there was an inkling of an idea that he hadn't responded fast enough. I am very, very sure that the media that is opposed to him, and weirdly still opposed to him, even though he hasn't been president for 3 years, that the media opposed to him would have been criticizing him for doing too little, and that Americans were dying on his watch and all the rest. So I think I think if you just refract this through the prism of pure tribal politics, you can understand it as well.
Yeah, it's really, it's heartbreaking to watch some of those clips and know that people are going to die because of them.
Yep.
Okay, but I want to go back to you as a.
We don't really have to now, do we?
No, we do, because the whole thing is about media in the time of COVID. So you're the media. You represent all the media.
No, I don't.
Do you think your leadership style has changed at all in this moment? Are you leading differently? You know, aside from like being able to host Zoom meetings, I assume in your sweatpants. Like,
this assumes I have a leadership style. Thank you very much for granting me one.
I imagine you have a. Like,
fine. Well, I mean, I think everybody who's you're experiencing this. You know, I have an all hands meeting every Friday with the whole of the editorial staff. One of the interesting things is that it's flattened out everybody in a kind of way. We have a big Washington presence, we have a New York presence, London, Los Angeles, San Francisco, people in far flung places. Now it's all level. We all just work in Zoom. You know, nobody's at the home office, nobody's wherever. So that's interesting. That is I find kind of a pleasant aspect of this. What's missing is serendipity. I like to manage by walking around, and so there's nowhere to walk around anymore. I can't just go knock on people's apartment doors and say, "So how you doing? What are you working on?"
Good. You should try it. See what happens.
But every manager at every level has to be very deliberate about affirmatively being in touch with their people, and there's nothing's going to happen serendipitously. So, I mean, luckily we're pretty advanced. I mean, almost to a pathological degree on Slack and everything else. So there's numerous ways we communicate already. So it was a much smoother transition. And you know, the joke of it is, and this is true for other media organizations, although we're doing very, very well in this, our audience has grown by leaps and bounds. I mean, it was pretty big before. It's huge now. We're doing great. This is not me. This is not the baker praising his own bread, because I'm talking about the geniuses who work with me, not me. But they're doing great stories, the writers and the editors, and the designers and video makers, everybody's doing great work. And so the question has periodically arisen. So why do we have offices? You know, like, it turns out we can do this very, very well. And it's not just about the Atlantic, obviously. I think everybody who rents or owns a lot of office space is kind of going, because like this technology that we're using right now is a year from now is going to seem very crude, because the developments here are going to be exponential, right? Because people need this every day now. So it is interesting on that front. You know, the other aspect, this is kind of the softer side of it, or the more human side. The other aspect is, I certainly don't always practice this, right? Because I'm very flawed, but I think that a good manager, like a good human, has to always recognize that the person they're interacting with has some drama going on in his or her life, right? That you don't see. Like, everybody, whatever that expression is, everybody's engaged in a great struggle, and it's invisible to you. Now that's doubled and tripled. We've had people who have lost grandparents and elderly relatives. We have a lot of staff in New York trapped in one-bedroom or studio apartments, you know, and so every time you want to get to the work, because the work is really important, you also have to remember, I don't know what's going on in their head right now. I don't know what private struggle they're engaged with. And so that takes more, you know, mindfulness is a word that I would use.
All right.
But I'm being sincere within the boundaries of how sincere I can possibly be.
You actually are very sincere on the inside. You just play different in Peoria. That's a different conversation. No, but I actually think one of the things for those of us,
therapy, we'll talk about that.
I'm happy to talk about it.
Good luck trying. Good luck.
No, but I actually think for those of us who struggle with that concept as leaders or managers of always recognizing that everyone has a great battle, I actually think this moment helps us. Like, you know, the people I work with tend to be, there aren't a lot of like young children, among the people who work at Sixth&I, but like, I know, as you know, my husband works in education. So he's talking to teachers and administrators all day, and he can see the kids like climbing on their laps, and like asking for more food. So it's like, it's not even that far away. You don't have to imagine how hard and what the different struggles people have.
No. I consider myself very lucky that our youngest is 19. I mean, we have all the kids here, but they're reasonably good about emptying the dishwasher. Reasonably. Good.
The hardest working appliance in the house right now.
Hardest working appliance in the house. And it's, I mean, they're ambivalent about it, but we're happy that they're home because they're great. But, I have a lot of staff with young kids. And one of the things early on, I encourage people to bring their kids to these Zoom meetings. Just like, it's fine if they're crawling all over you. We had a contest for the kids last week, draw a cover of the Atlantic, and so the kids sent in that we did a slide. You have to do all this stuff. It's great. And it creates a good spirit in a tough time. But just the child management issues alone that people are facing are profound. And then, and then the other side of it is that people have parents who are in distant cities and they can't see them. Some of our staff is, young enough that they're grandparents, and, it's rough.
Yeah.
Rough.
Yeah, and people who are living on their own. I think there's just like there's a lot that's going on.
I think a lot of people who are living on their own would love to have some kids running around their apartments right now. I mean, it's you always want the thing that you don't have.
Oh,
but
for sure. I've been counseling some. Yeah, there's been a lot of. It's just because there's so much uncertainty around everything right now.
Yeah.
By the way, we're about halfway through with the conversation, unfortunately, but this is just my moment to remind all of you. Sorry?
Unfortunately for me or for the audience? For the audience, definitely.
I know. Well, they want this to go all night.
Oh, yeah.
This is my moment to remind you that please submit your questions, and they will be given over to me and to Jeff, and we'll begin answering the questions maybe in about 10 minutes or so. I just have a few more for you, Jeff. I actually, you talked about your kids being home. That's sort of like a silver lining, as it were. And while I don't think any of us would ever say like we're glad that coronavirus or that it even happened for a reason. That's not my theology. It's not the way. But there are ways that like this sort of brings out new ideas, new ways of being. There are certain things that happen that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And it's not just like what's happening in our own homes with our family. I imagine it's happening in the Atlantic as well. Like what are some of the silver linings of this moment? Like, I mean, it could be that we realize we don't need offices as much, but other silver linings are journalists noticing that talking to people through Zoom allows them to sort of open up in different ways. Like, is there anything that you're noticing that is surprising to you that is actually beneficial to you this moment?
Well, I try to make a large point here, which is that I think we are in many ways blessed in that, like any journalism organization, but ours in particular, we're founded with a mission. And all journalists are on a mission. If you go into this for the pay, you're not the brightest person in the world. You go into it because you want to change the world. You want to bring truth to people. And so it's interesting. I had a meeting the morning after the election in 2016. I got the staff together. And everybody was sort of in shock because no one in the mainstream media or in many other places understood what was happening. And I said, this is why we're here. Like, this is what we do. Like, the Atlantic in particular, because it's founded to be the magazine of the American idea. It was founded before the Civil War to be a magazine in favor of abolition. It survived the Civil War. It survived the Great Depression, World War I. It survived the pandemic of 1918. It survived, and it's always found, and previous editors have noticed this, it's always found its true purpose in crisis, right? And so, the last 3 years of covering a very, very unusual presidency and all of the attendant controversies and crises was really, really good training for what happened. We didn't know at the time what we were training for, but we were there and we were ready and we threw ourselves at the work. So having purpose right now is extraordinary. I would rather not have the pandemic and figure out other ways to motivate the staff or to figure out what the purpose and role of the Atlantic is in American civic life and intellectual life. But we're here. This is what it is. and you know, it's a lot easier for us to get our way through this because our work is directly related to it. And perhaps I was talking to one of our great writers today about this, and I said, you know, your stories literally help millions of people understand their predicament. You bring light instead of just heat and noise, and that's a great blessing.
What a great line. You bring light instead of just heat.
Well,
I think that's it. You
some
should write
people
that
some
down.
people bring a lot of just like excess, you know, drama.
No,
And,
yeah, I got it. I got it. It
yeah,
was,
no, but we're trying to, you know, give people some information that they can use and context and history.
no, but I feel like this sort of the sense of aliveness that can really be depressed in sort of like an ongoing day-to-dayness, everydayness of life when things are, and I feel like for those of us, and this actually what you said was very resonant to me also in terms of the work that we're trying to do at Sixth&I right now. Like you can feel more alive in these moments where you really feel like you are being of service in a way that has the potential to change the trajectory, however tiny a way, of people's lives.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's really.
Fair enough.
How do you guys? One of the things that we're always trying to figure out at Sixth&I, always, I mean, it's been 8 weeks, but like that we're trying to figure out is to balance between programs that are like just fun and relaxing. You know, we had a tech study this week on Judaism and Star Wars for May the 4th, you know, and programs that are like just like sort of deeply moving and really speaking to the moment that we're in, people's sense of anxiety and loss and grief. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the Atlantic has some of the nice array of articles, some of which are like, you know, like kill the dress code. There was an article about, you know, and some of which are, you know, obviously really serious, like we're all going to get corona. And is there any thought that goes into sort of like a balance between the articles that are more fun and lighthearted and the ones that are just really serious, or it just happens?
No. Yeah, we're a general interest magazine. We think about this every single day. Like, you know, there is going to be a period after COVID-19, right? We want to provide people with, we do want to provide people with diversions and interesting feature articles about nothing in particular and crossword puzzles and all the rest. I mean, what we also know about our readership, about all readerships, is that people want to know what's going on. The uncertainty of this and the length and the duration of it is what makes a lot of people really anxiety ridden. And so we're trying to do that. But yeah, it's completely appropriate. And, you know, there's an interesting, there's a line that we have to walk. So we do things like, here are 22 movies. David Sims, our great movie guy, you know, 22 underrated movies that you should watch while you're stuck inside. We're you know, I got Dave Grohl, the lead singer, the head of the Foo Fighters, their Nirvana drummer, to do a Dave Grohl's pandemic playlist, like, you know, 10 songs for every mood of the pandemic. You know, I mean, fun stuff. Great lists of books and this and that and the other thing. It's all predicated on the fact that you, the reader, have time and access to get to those movies, right? I mean, we understand that. That's why we have to keep covering the lives of people who aren't so lucky. But we're also there to serve the readers where they are. And as long as you're mindful of that and signal that, I think you're fine. And then it's another form of service. Maybe it's not the same kind of service as, you know, this is why Trump is wrong about injecting bleach into your body, or this is, you know, we're doing a wonderful project. Alexis Madrigal and Rob Meyer sort of took the lead on this. They were doing this national COVID tracking, you know, testing tracking. And so it's a fantastic program. And, you know, that's a straight up public service, but it's also a public service to tell people, you know, talk to people about what they can cook and what they can watch and what they can eat. I mean, we're just trying to balance it.
Yeah, it's like no.
It's sort of an endless improvisation.
Right. But so there is. It's like you're building the bridge as you're on it. Is that the same?
Yeah. You're flying. You're fixing the plane as you're flying.
That's right. I'm also thinking about the quote, but I can't remember whether it's from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel or Dr. King, but it's definitely one of them. That's sort of to comfort. I know it's my brain. You're having this.
I know. Yeah.
To comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. It's like, you know, you can't, if it was all listening.
If either the role of journalists, you mean?
Yeah. And the role of the elite. Yeah.
Yeah. No. The role of journalists is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. Was that either of them?
It was
Robert Shira.
You know what? In my mind, it's
Okay, fine. Whatever works in your
leadership. Okay, leadership.
Sorry. I have like a built-in little fact checker who lives in the back of my, brain, reminding me,
I had a question about fact checking, which I imagine, with things moving so quickly might be difficult, but we're running out of time. I want to ask a few other questions, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah.
You were talking a little bit about anxiety, and when you and I spoke earlier, you were talking about how, like, one of the things journalists want to be able to do is have stories with beginnings, middles, and ends, right?
Yeah.
They want to be able to tell a story, and how difficult that is in this moment.
Yeah. Yeah. You mean the coherence problem?
Yeah, there's like a coherence because we actually don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you have the same problem in theology as we have in journalism, right? People. I had an editor once at the New Yorker who said that the real bias in journalism is toward coherence. That the expectation is that you write a story and it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a problem, a course of controversy to deal with the problem, and a resolution to the problem, right? And so, and I think in particular, American TV news culture, maybe because of the length of time they have to do, they sort of telescope things and sort of make everything, they try to make everything understandable and knowable in incredibly short periods of time. And then when you go, what is the great sin of going on a TV talk show, being on a panel? The great sin is looking at the host or moderator who's talking to you and going, I don't know. You're not allowed to do, I don't know. Like you ask, right. You get a question, you go, how would I know? Like, when is coronavirus going to end? I don't know. But you're not allowed to do that in the culture. And so that bias is a real thing. It gets us into trouble sometimes. It makes us make false promises. We all want to know when this ends, when we go back to quote unquote normal. We're gradually, the notion is gradually sinking in that there's no such thing as going back to normal, at least in the short to medium term. And even after that, right. We don't know what things are going to look like. But this is a big problem of leaving when the blank space is blank for a reason. Just leave it there and just say we don't know. The world is jangly and it doesn't. All the pieces don't connect.
Yeah, I think the theology of it is really complex. I do think that to be able to have the humility to say we don't know, and to be able to hold other people's anxiety in this moment is some of the work of leadership.
Yeah.
Speaking about things we don't know about, do you have a gut about how this COVID-19 is going to affect the election in 2020? Like, are people going to be too exhausted to pay attention to the election?
My gut is that, and we have an article coming out next week. I can talk a little bit about very amazing piece on disinformation. We've been trying to cover disinformation a lot because it's incredibly salient. It's more salient than ever. We also are going to do a lot of work on, voting by mail and how different camps of different types of people could exploit this crisis to their own anti-democratic ends. And I think the more journalism we have on that, the better. I think there are a lot of obviously nefarious actors, domestically and internationally, who want to screw with the election. I think the election is going to happen. It's really, this is uncharted territory. How do you campaign when you can't campaign? I assume at some point in the summer or fall, you'll see the candidates out in some way. But it's not going to feel like any election. Not going to feel like any election we've ever had for two reasons. One, this, and the second is that the president is Donald Trump and he's running for re-election. And so, all previous indicators of how things go, are shot. But yeah, I'm I think worried about it. You saw in Wisconsin, it was Wisconsin, right? A couple of weeks ago.
Sure.
People forced to wait online physically to vote. And there are a lot of people who want to force that because they think that's going to benefit their party.
Yeah. The election makes me how we're going to prepare makes my anxiety go up. Okay, I'm going to turn to some of the questions that have been chatted to us. Oh, here's one. How can the public better support our journalists during this moment? Are journalists observing an increased hostility toward objective and/or investigative reporting at this time?
I don't know how to measure the hostility. Obviously, it's mainly electronic. It's not in person. I don't know how to measure that. I mean, don't forget, we just had a great piece today, David Graham, on how the country's actually, I think the term he used was astonishingly united around questions of, social distancing and staying at home. That there is a pretty broad consensus that this is a serious problem. And I think there's an equivalently broad consensus that the way to get good information is to pick a quality source of news and analysis and stick with them. I mean, I would answer your question. Ordinarily, I'd be embarrassed to answer as in a crass way, but the way to be supportive of journalists is to pay them for the work that they do. And the only way, and the way that you, the news consumer, the citizen, can do that is by buying subscriptions, theatlantic.com. But I'm small C Catholic on that. If supporting the New York Times is important, supporting the Washington Post, supporting the New Yorker, supporting quality outlets is important. I happen to think that you should support the Atlantic more, but that's the only way. We made a terrible mistake in journalism over the past 20 years by giving away for free something that we used to ask people to pay for. And we got people used to getting it for free. We thought the advertising market would be there to float us forever. It wasn't. And so we're in a jam.
Yeah. And
so what you do is you give us a little bit of money and then we can go do our job.
Do you think that when we reach the other side of this moment, because I agree with you that it's not going to go back to normal. Like, I hope that it's not going to go back to normal, given some of what we talked about in terms of like the bifurcation. But when we sort of get to the other side in a way, do you think that there are going to be a lot of smaller news outlets that are going to have had to close because they haven't?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I worry about the most is the regional daily newspaper. Obviously, yeah. I mean, you're going to have a situation in which you have state capitals, which are traditionally the locus of corruption in American politics, right? You're going to have state capitals that have no functioning daily newspaper with functioning reporters. People muddle along and people are innovative, and we're finding all kinds of digital only nonprofits that are trying to fill some of the gap and so on. But when I was coming up in journalism, the vast national network of powerful regional newspapers was a real thing. St. Petersburg, Miami, Atlanta, Providence, Boston Globe, all the way to the West San Francisco. And I mean, there were papers that each had newsrooms of several hundred journalists.
Right.
Philadelphia Inquirer was an astonishingly good newspaper. That's where the real damage is happening. You're going to see a lot of damage on web only outlets that are reliant on advertisers only and not subscribers. Subscriptions are the only way out that I know. I'm probably not creative enough to think of other ways, but subscribing, treating it as a utility, treating the information that comes into your house as a utility, the same way you think of the electricity and the water that's coming into your house. Right. You're happy to pay for those.
Yeah.
You should be you're happy for the tube that brings in the information that you need. You want the electric company to function, and you want the press to function too.
And you want the press to be as free as possible. And one thing that makes the press free is not to be beholden to any one group of people funding it and supporting it, but instead of having millions of people.
Well, look, yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, we could, I'm going to be Panglossian here, but we could enter a golden age in which we're in a direct relationship with our readers, right? Like you spread the risk across a million different people who each send you 30, 40, 50, 60 bucks, whatever, a year. And advertising is a great business too for newspapers, but as journalists, our interests align 100% really with the readers. The readers want, presumably if they're giving you their money, they want what you do, which is at its best, high quality, deeply reported, carefully edited, fact-checked journalism. And so maybe if we can get more people to treat this as not a luxury, but as a necessity, in the same way they treat their other utilities as necessity. By the way, the same way they treat Netflix as a utility, I mean, I'm not lecturing or anything, but I think, ultimately your daily newspaper is more important for democracy than your Netflix subscription.
Right. But there's something disruptive that could be, there could be sort of something good at the end that comes of this, I think.
I like to think.
There's a really interesting question. I don't know if you'll even know the answer, but in the fast-moving pace of scientific progress involving COVID-19, how do you publish scientific discoveries without having the full opportunity to go through standard peer review process? At what point do you and your staff choose to publish potential progress?
As non-scientists, except we have a couple of people who know a tremendous amount, and one I mentioned, an MD. We generally don't publish or say, hey, there's a possible cure because this Joe Schmo and whatever says it's a possible cure. We have, first of all, we have now a large growing group of scientists, MDs, who write directly for us, right? Write directly onto our site, which is great. And we as editors follow their lead to some degree, check with them, check information. The last thing we want to do is put false hope out there. One of the things that we do is try to debunk and note that, there is, whenever there's like some undue or too early excitement about a particular cure, the regular journalistic impulse is to try to knock it down a little bit, pressure test it. So I don't worry about this question that much. Things that haven't been, and also this is journalism across any subject. It's like, you're as good, if you decide that a person who's providing you with information is credible, then you're more apt to run with that information. If Tony Fauci says something about medicine, it means more than if Mike Pence says something about medicine. You know what I mean? We're more apt to immediately say, if Tony Fauci says it as a great infectious disease specialist, we're apt to give it more weight. But we're not an academic journal. We're not doing the peer review. We're getting the peers of those people to do the reviewing in a kind of informal ad hoc way.
Right. It goes back to the leadership question about trust, about the leadership question we asked before. And it feels like trust is sort of like the cornerstone, the foundation of what a leader, that you should be able to trust someone, a leader, that what they say is something that you should think more about and perhaps even adopt yourself.
Well, that's why this is such a unique crisis, because the majority of people in America don't trust the national leader to provide accurate, timely information in a let's call it a selfless way.
Yeah.
But that's why this situation feels worse for that reason. Feels worse than it otherwise should feel.
Yeah, I think that's true. All right, another question from the group. The recent Atlantic article, Why America is a Failed State, charts how our country has been coming apart really since the start of the Iraq War. How do we come together? How do we reverse the trends described in that article?
Now I'm supposed to do that in 9 minutes?
Yeah, you can do it. You can do it.
No. Look, we did a special issue last year, turned out to be prescient. Again, I'm the baker praising his own bread, but whatever. On how to stop a civil war from happening. I mean, these are problems that are deeper than a series of events going back to the Iraq War, 9/11, or before. I mean, we are engaged in Yoni Applebaum wrote a great piece on this. We are engaged in an experiment that no democracy has ever engaged in. We're trying to transition slowly and steadily from a majority-dominated democracy to a truly multi-ethnic democracy, right? And the group in power has to adjust to that, and sometimes isn't adjusting. That's why Donald Trump's election was in many ways, a white nationalist backlash. It was people who were worried about the future direction of the country and found somebody who quite literally and vividly talked about building walls, right? And so we're in the middle of this great experiment. It has never been done successfully, so it's a tough one. But that's one challenge of trying to turn this into a non-zero sum game for different groups, which is to say the expansion of rights and the bringing of other groups into the middle does not mean that you have to leave the middle too. You know what I mean? That's one thing. I mean, we have tremendous challenges on technology. I mean, we have you know, the ability to move bad information so quickly into so many people at once that it's very, very hard for the good information to catch up. That's a problem. We have social media platforms that reward anger and reward extremism. We have a political system that a party system, a nomination system that is overly dependent on the extreme wings of both parties, right? That's why the victory, not to go down some political pathway here, but that's why the victory of Joe Biden should not have been as big a surprise as it was, because Twitter is not American reality. It's a portion of American reality, but it turns out that a lot of people are moderate, including African Americans in South Carolina, are what you would call moderate Democrats, or vote for reasons other than reasons you thought. So we have we have that problem. I have no diagnosis. We can diagnose it. How to cure it is hard without leaning too heavily on the subject of leadership. I mean, another experiment we're engaged in as a country right now, and this is a unique experiment, is that we for the first time in any of our memories, we have a president who doesn't even hypocritically pay lip service to the idea that he is meant to unite rather than divide, right? I mean, Barack Obama and George W. Bush, for all their differences, are so much more alike than Donald Trump and any of the previous presidents. You know, I mean, even Richard Nixon, who had a criminal and corrupt side to him that eventually enveloped him, was a serious political innovator and policy innovator who spoke in public in the right way generally. But now we're in an experiment where the president of the United States has decided that he's the president of only his people. And that's until maturity and until you have it in the White House someone who's not speaking about unity and being the president for all the people, do you realize what the absence of that means? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean,
there's so many reasons why we're in the pickle we're in, and the pandemic is a perfect way to illustrate how bad it's gotten. Many people in America, including many powerful politicians, have spent a lot of time in the last 20, 30, 40 years putting down the idea of the utility of government, right? The government, the goal is to shrink government, turn everything to the private sector. Government is just corrupt. It's a waste of, government is a waste of time, and it's corrupt until your boat is sinking and the Coast Guard's nowhere to be found. Then the Coast Guard, which is the government, comes and rescues you. What we found is that when you hollow out American governmental institutions like the CDC, for instance, and you politicize apolitical institutions like the State Department, you find yourself in a jam when you actually need these functions. And so that's yet another layer of what has to come back if we're going to succeed as a country.
Right. I wonder if this is a moment for the resurgence of the small group. You know, there was all of the sort of research about how Americans don't participate in groups anymore civically, you know, the whole bowling alone sort of idea from the, and I don't know, you know, if this, because we're not getting what we need from the top. I would imagine even people who support the current leadership are still not, except for a random few who actually are injecting themselves. They're not getting that sort of the fullness of leadership in this moment. If there are like ways that we're going to turn to like the smaller groups, I don't know, maybe it's good. Maybe it's good for religion. I don't know, for small groups that people can turn to in these moments. If they can't like sort of turn to the country as a whole.
What's interesting now, and this is why, you know, the social media companies, Facebook in particular, having sort of a resurgence of understanding in a way that they didn't have in the last couple of years. It's like, now that you literally can only bowl alone or not bowl at all for health reasons, you know, Facebook, there's the controversial parts of Facebook and the bad parts of Facebook, but Facebook is also, just to a large degree, little tiny groups of people with like-minded interests or geographic, yeah, and they formed up electronically, digitally, and so the impulse is still there. I don't know what the answer. I mean, look, you're asking in a way one of the big questions about human behavior. When this more or less ends, do we go back to gathering together in large groups and seeking out physical closeness? Being in crowds at baseball games and concerts and church and synagogue services and mosque services and all the rest? Or are we kind of permanently like, just stay 6 feet away from me? I don't know.
God forbid.
I tend to think that humans are, you know, it's very, very hard to change human behavior.
Yeah. That's
built up over decades or hundreds of years. So I don't see the end of going to a baseball game. I do think that we're in for a couple of rough years.
I agree. So we're going to have to end very soon, unfortunately. So let's close with a positive question.
I'm not really good at those.
I know. We opened. You are a catastrophizer. That's true. But also you practice gratitude now. So I knew you were going to roll your eyes. Okay.
No, I do.
So let's end with sort of like, what is something that you are optimistic about? Whether it's something that's going to happen like tomorrow or next week or next month, what is one thing that you're optimistic about for the future?
I do think that I'm old enough where I could actually use the term the young people, the youngs. I have a lot of hope that this will prompt a level of thoughtful activism on issues related to, I was just in a conversation before about the gig economy. And remember how everybody talked about, oh, the gig economy is amazing, it'd be flexible work and you're your own boss and people get, you know, come on. It's like these people are alone and at sea and you know, you don't work, you don't get paid. I'm thinking that maybe we move toward a broader discussion of what equity means within the capitalist framework. It's fine. You and I were talking once about this in the context of Israel, and I always find it funny that that certain conservative or right-wing leaders in America now profess to admire Israel so much, and which is fine. Go ahead, admire it, great. But they're admiring a country that has just almost defeated its coronavirus problem, in part because of centralized state control, in part because it has a nationalized healthcare system where you don't pay to get healthcare. You know, it's a much more communitarian culture, and what's funny about all this praise for Israel that comes from those sectors is that they are praising a country that is organized in some ways from a social compact standpoint along Scandinavian lines, right? And I do think that maybe we're moving toward a conversation that takes us some of the way there. I also just, you know, it's very hard to, you know, humans are pretty resilient as a species. And so we tend to, as someone I know once said, kind of muddle through. You muddle through. The final thing I would say about the United States is that this has been a going concern for quite a while, the American experiment. one of the great, I'm a big American patriot. I love this country. One of the things that I love the most about this country is that it has the ability to self-correct. The story of America viewed from one angle is the story about the gradual, fitful, but directionally expansive movement toward rights for more and more groups of people. And, you know, we go forward, we go back, we go forward, we go to the side. You know, it's not just a moral arc that's long but bends toward justice. Sometimes it bends in some kind of weird ways. But America is very good, as a democracy should be, at fixing its problems without outside intervention, you know, without a Martian invasion to make us feel like we've got to go do something. So nothing is permanent. Nothing at all is permanent. And the condition of our government today and where we're at, there's nothing permanent. America has been through a lot worse than this. The story of America is fitful progress. And so with any luck, what we'll learn out of this, for starters, is that we need a much better CDC and a much more serious national health emergency infrastructure. And we'll build those things because we still have that American spirit, I hope.
Amen.
I wasn't going to preach. I apologize.
That was the rabbi in me.
No, I know that was.
I hope that it's true. So I get to offer you gratitude. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for participating this evening and for sharing your time and your insights. And thank you to The Atlantic, one of our longtime program partners, for collaborating with us when we know how much you guys have on your plates right now. This was a really important conversation, and we're just really grateful. Again, this program was free. So if you are in a position to donate to Sixth&I, which is a nonprofit that is based on earned income to a large extent, please do. And if you are not a subscriber to The Atlantic, please become one perhaps right now. And if you're already a subscriber, I'm sure that you have a cousin or a sibling or someone else who still needs a subscription. Thank you all for showing up this evening. Please stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Take care.